I don't know why, but when somebody tells me I can't do something, it really makes me want to do it. It probably goes back to when I was a Marine. Right here is a citrus tree. Originally, I was actually going to cut this tree down because it was just really big and it wasn't producing any fruit. And the occasional one or two that it would was this really sour, like bitter, large, not lemon or lime, but just a non-edible citrus. So I decided I'm gonna come cut this down. But as I started to cut it down, I realized that it was actually the rootstock that had overgrown the original grafting of the citrus, and that's why this thing was doing so bad. When I looked up other YouTube videos on how to prune a citrus, they're really only saying you want to get that one flyer that's shooting out and you want to take care of that. And you really shouldn't prune a citrus tree. Heavy pruning will cause it to die. Well, because I don't want to accept that, and I knew that it's either completely kill this tree or I'm going to have to heavy prune it in order to try and get it to recover, I'm going to end up pruning it and doing what I shouldn't be doing. So I'm going to show you how I did it and how I'm going to keep it alive. So let's go over a few things. This isn't a pruning technique that you want to use all the time. This is a once in the tree's lifetime that you want to do this. It's really only because the rootstock surpassed the graft and it was no longer productive. This is not a pruning you should do every year to a citrus or to a citrus that is healthy and producing fruit. This is not that kind of prune. So the next big important thing to think about if you're considering doing a pruning like this to a citrus tree is when. You want to know when is the right time to prune. And typically the middle to end of winter or the beginning of spring is when you'd want to prune your tree. That's when sunlight is not at its harshest. You don't have these really long days where the sun is going to beat down on this tree. And it's going to give it the opportunity for the bark to throw out new shoots to protect itself from the sunlight. Citrus trees really don't like their bark being exposed to the sun. They'll get sunburn and then it'll die and peel off, and eventually that'll cause a tree to die. So at the end of winter, beginning of spring is when you want to do this. Another question I had to ask myself is why? Why should I bother to keep this tree instead of just completely cutting it down, digging out the root ball, and putting in a new tree? Maybe go with figs instead, so this whole row is figs, or plant in some different citrus. Well, for me, I want to keep the root system that's already here, that's been here for at least 10 years. I want to keep that growing because it's well established. And that's important. A tree that's well established and has all of these roots really set into the ground, it's going to be a healthy tree. Now, the rootstock did grow past the original graft, and that's a separate issue, but this does still have really healthy roots. So I want to keep this because of that fact. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is look at the trunk of the tree and figure out which one is the rootstock and which one is the graft. Obviously the graft is the ideal citrus that is going to produce for us, and the rootstock is more about the healthy roots of the tree and its overall life. So the rootstock is what we want to get rid of, because that, if it does produce fruit, won't be good, and if it doesn't, then you're just growing a tree for ornamental reasons. So this is where it gets hard, because you have to prune the life out of this tree. I took out one of the trunks from the rootstock that's at least 3 inches around, and then there were several other ones that were growing on it, and all of those had to go. And even then, I still ended up pruning a lot of these other branches that the original graft is part of. And they've lost some of their leaves, but don't worry. If you do it at the right time, you follow all these different steps and you pay attention to your tree, it should survive. So after I've pruned it all back, I got rid of everything. I checked every branch to make sure that this was all from the original rootstock. So once I've pruned the life out of this tree, I watered, and I gave it a lot of water. I turned on the sprinkler for a full day and just gave this tree lots and lots of water, because it's gonna go into shock. It just had a massive amount of its foliage cut off, and what's left needs help because it's not like vigorous green growth like the rootstock was. This is the little branches that were trying to survive being shaded out by the rootstock. So I gave this lots of water, and I also used some of my Jadam liquid fertilizer to help feed the root system. And that's what's starting to happen. I pruned this tree several weeks ago when we were getting a lot of overcast and a lot of rain, and occasionally we would get a few sunny bits of sun coming throughout the day, and it started throwing out a lot of little shoots so that way it can start growing and protecting itself. Now that we're coming into spring, it's starting to heat up, so I need to go ahead and paint this tree. I'm going to use a white latex paint, and I'm diluting it 50-50 with water. And I'm going to go ahead and cover the whole trunk of the tree to help give it some extra time for these little branches that are starting to shoot up to grow and put leaves out to protect it. Because if the trunk dies or these branches die, then that entire limb dies off and then it won't have any shadings. So we need to give it a little bit of help and just put a little sunscreen layer on it in order to help give it time to adjust to the more sunlight we're getting and the warmer weather we're starting to have. So that's what I'm going to do right now. So after you prune this tree and now the bark is exposed to the sun, it's going to heat up the bark, and that's going to tell the tree there's sunlight, there's warmth on this area. I need to put growth out in this area in order to shade the trunk of the tree. And that's what started to happen. Right here is my original graft, and this is the one I care about the most. All of this is the rootstock, and we do need to protect it because this is giving life to this tree, but we don't have to worry about everything around this side of the tree where it started to overtake. This is really like applying sunscreen just for trees to help protect it from the sun in order to keep it nice and healthy and happy. Now, this whitewash that I'm using is diluted down, so you don't want to cover up every branch and all these new little shoots that are coming out, but if you do, it's okay. It's not 100% going to block out the sunlight, so the branches will still continue to grow and get the light and photosynthesize on those leaves. Now, it's okay if you don't get every single branch, as long as you're able to cover up a majority of the tree that you can tell is still alive. And you also want to make sure you're getting the high spots and anywhere that's sun facing. If you're in the northern hemisphere, that would be the east, south, and west side. And if you're in the southern hemisphere, then it would be the east, north, and west side of the tree. But it's good to just kind of give the whole tree a good covering and not trying to get only where you think the sunlight is going to hit this tree. Now, another thing that I know I'm gonna have to do is I'm gonna have to pay attention to this as the weather's heating up. So I may have to come out here in a few weeks and do another coat if I see that the tree is starting to get sun damage because it is getting hot or too much sunlight, and maybe it needs a little bit more protection. So that is something to be aware of, that if you do this, it's not a one and done kind of deal. You need to consistently pay attention to the tree in order to have the best chance of success of having the tree live from this extreme pruning. Okay, so there's a few last things I wanted to add in before I forget. First, yes, I am using latex paint. And even though that's not ideal and I really would prefer not to, sometimes it's the lesser of two evils. It's either let this tree die or use latex paint to protect it until it recovers. I gotta wait for this helicopter to go by. Now, I did leave a lot of dead branches as well, and I wasn't sure what was still alive and what would throw out new growth, so I left them. And I decided to even paint some of these thicker ones in hopes that they will throw out shoots and start growing new branches and leaves on them. But if not, that's okay, because later on I will prune these off, because this will need some continuous light little pruning here and there as it starts to grow and fill in. And because I did put latex paint on it, I will be throwing these branches away instead of trying to compost them. Like, I'm aware it's not ideal, so I will then take the proper steps to get rid of these branches that have paint on them. And one last tip is pay attention to the root, because it's going to want to throw out more growth from the rootstock and try to overtake the graft again. As you can see from right here, pruning this just a few weeks ago, it's thrown out new shoots that are from the rootstock that are trying to overtake this tree again. So you need to stay on top of it. That way you don't have the same issue like I did with how the tree looked beforehand. All right, so that is it. The tree is painted. I'm happy with it for now. The weather's gonna be heating up and we're gonna get longer days. So I'm sure that this is going to start putting on some new growth real fast. And if you wanna see if this tree lives or dies, if I failed at what I'm saying, then go ahead and subscribe and follow along, because I will do follow-up videos about this tree. Hopefully it turns out well and I have a nice healthy citrus that will give me lots of edible fruit. All right, so go out in the garden, go get dirty, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.